the whole thing that this tape shows he didn't kill himself is like a joke. But worse than that, it's a joke that we all get. Like, they're not fooling anybody. So I feel like we're at a dangerous point now.
So recently, Tucker Carlson delved into the topic about why the feds are still lying to us about Epstein and the Epstein story. This comes after the DOJ and FBI released that memo that said, imagine that, no client list exists, after contradicting what Pam Bondi had said earlier, and that Epstein didn't kill himself. This is in a context of a discussion with Saagar and Enjeti, and both of these men believe that this is an obvious cover-up. So let's get their take on it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I don't want to be lied to, and I specifically don't want to be lied to by the very people who built careers, and I'm talking here specifically about Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, and many others who now work for the administration, who fed MAGA and the American people and promised them to get to the bottom of this, only to turn their tune immediately upon assuming office, lying before Congress, talking about this is an obvious case of suicide, going on the Joe Rogan podcast, and effectively asking for some level of trust that I don't give to any government official. FBI Director Kash Patel said, if I had this information, don't you think I would release it? No, I don't, because actually your actions now just in the last couple of days only vindicate the idea that this is not only a systematic government cover-up at the highest levels, not only involving sex trafficking, but going all the way up to the top levels of the U.S. intelligence, the Israeli intelligence community, implicating powerful people, billionaires here in the United States, former prime ministers of Israel, our current president, former presidents of the United States, and for them to come out on the very day, or I guess the day before, that the Israeli prime minister is visiting Washington
for the third
time this year. Why exactly? You know, can we go over that? Last time I checked, this is a country to do about $52 billion in bilateral trade with, equivocal to like Singapore and Chile. I don't remember the last time the Chilean or Singaporean leaders were in Washington for 3 times in the last 6 months, and to who we give $3.3 billion to. Switzerland. These are all countries I love, by the way. I visited all 3 that I just listed. I love them.
Yeah, this is absolutely right. It's the Israel lobby's command over the government, the influence in the government. Yes, this is an obvious cover-up. And instead of getting to the bottom of it, Kash Patel and Dan Bongino and crowd, instead of actually divulging the information, being transparent about it, they contradicted each other. Pam Bondi said there were thousands of hours of children being molested that they needed to review, such that there may be charges. And she said that the client list actually existed, not only existed, but was on her desk. There's film footage of this happening. So they're trying to spin themselves out of this thing, and it just is a giant cover-up that the whole uniparty is involved in. So that's obvious here. And yeah, Epstein had connections to Mossad in 3 different ways. He was very close friends with Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel, who visited him regularly, by the way. He got his initial wealth from Les Wexner, also tied closely to the Israeli government. His partner's father was Robert Maxwell, who was a known Mossad agent. So yeah, there's a lot of duplicity here, and I think we can generally apply the Occam's razor and know why.
You know, would they serve?
And Israel. I think you went. Did you go to school in Israel?
That's right. I did 6 weeks in Israel. It's a great country. I like it a lot, but it's not about that. This is about my country. And so watching this all just get perverted and then used and hijacking our government is just particularly offensive to me, not only just as an American, but I feel particularly not only deceived by the people like the FBI director and the deputy director, Dan Bongino, but the attorney general who went on camera after assuming her office on the White House lawn. These are supposed to mean things, and said thousands of victims. We have the client list. We have the flight logs. She held a little press conference, whatever event with so-called influencers in which she gave them the Epstein files, an infamous photo that was released. It turned out that that binder actually had redacted information in it, which was already public, just to demonstrate how they were turning they're turning the White House effectively into a performative show and making, light of the fact that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of underage victims. And it's just not the victims, it's the fact that it extends to the highest levels of the elite, the transatlantic elite, and possibly even beyond that, from some of the richest men in our country, presidents of the United States, former prime ministers of Israel. We're talking here about Bill Gates, Leon Black, Leslie Wexner, the richest and most powerful people in the world.
And Prince Andrew, royalty in the UK. Yeah, this stretches far and wide. This sex trafficking ring reaches into the highest levels of our government and other governments. So for them to sweep this under the rug, this is crazy in consideration when they'll throw the book at people in individual American states that own the wrong weapons, that have a firearm that you're not supposed to own, or for engaging in prostitution or soliciting it, or for doing illicit drugs that are also these are victimless crimes. They will throw the book at these people, lock them behind bars forever, but we're never going to get answers on this. We're supposed to believe that Maxwell and Epstein trafficked minors to no one, and there's no victims anymore. How is Maxwell even in prison under these premises? What kind of evidence was shown about who engaged in these trafficking services with this sex ring? I'm sorry, I don't believe that Epstein killed himself when there was no evidence like they claim. I'm sorry. I just don't believe that.
Nobel Committee, the scientific, the community, Harvard, MIT, the tentacles through which this operation had its hands in and stretches all the way back to the 1980s. It is one of the most disgusting intelligence operations, I think, in United States intelligence history, rivaling some of the things, eventually that led to the death of President Kennedy. And the thing is around this time, is just like Kennedy, we all know the truth. We know that this document released by the Trump administration is complete bullshit. And I guess that maybe, just like with the Kennedy assassination, they expect us to just get over it in a period of time. And I genuinely think it's incumbent on anybody who was either supportive of the president, any United States citizen, to say no. We demand absolute and total transparency on this case, and particularly of these government officials. Do not use your platform to enrich yourself on these podcast platforms and constantly talk about Epstein and the Epstein files, eventually assume office, change on a dime, and expect us to trust you.
Absolutely. The thing that we need for this story not to go away, for it to continue to rattle the cages of the elites, of the establishment, of the government, is to keep talking about it. Clamor for answers. Do not let them forget it, like the Kennedy assassination, which also the details of which were swept under the rug under a carefully orchestrated Warren Commission headed by Alan Dulles, the man that Kennedy dismissed and had fired for his absurd Bay of Pigs operation, which was a false flag designed to draw the U.S. into a regime change operation. And by the way, Kennedy tried to stop the Domina project, which was Israel's stealing of nukes from the United States, and he tried to get the ACS, the American Zionist Council, AZC, to register as a foreign entity. This is the precursor to APEC. Sorry I couldn't say that. But yeah, that's where we're at. We're supposed to believe that, like the Kennedy assassination, this is just going to go away. I hope not. I hope the age of independent media is such that people keep talking about this.
That is not how this works. No. And in particular, in that document, I think it's one of the most disgusting documents ever released by the United States government, because it said there was no blackmail, we're not releasing this information. Kash Patel has this new line about how we're not going to re-victimize women. Ask the Epstein victims themselves. They have been begging for this information to come to light, specifically to implicate the powerful men that victimized them.
Including Virginia Giuffre, who was an adamant supporter of getting to the bottom of this, and she mysteriously killed herself a few months ago too. Now, I know there's many different opinions on that and whether she actually did, but that's just another layer of the absurdity to this case, is that even the victims have gone away.
And through which they were, they were basically used for trafficking purposes to ensnare them in this high-level U.S. intelligence, Israeli intelligence operation, probably run in conjunction. And the trail of this entire thing it enrages me. It actually enrages me as an American.
I don't think you're alone. And I do think, as someone who voted for the president, campaigned for the president a lot, I'm not attacking the president, but I think even people who are fully on board with, the bulk of the MAGA agenda are like, this is too much, actually.
Yes.
I'm saying that with love, and I hope that they're listening, because I think this threatens to blow up the whole thing. But let's just back up a little bit and just pick at some of the inconsistencies here. So, You're saying that Pam Bondi said on camera, we have a client list.
On the White House lawn.
I've seen the client list.
Yes.
And then yesterday, she's saying there's no client list.
There's no client list. And
That's exactly what happened. And the way that they're spinning this is they're saying that Pam Bondi, when answering that question, she thought they meant just the totality of evidence that exists in this case, which, by the way, they seem to be denying right now anyways. But no, she answered directly the client list. She said, it's on my table. She nodded her head in relation to that question in particular. You can look at the video for that to be true. Now, Tucker is a little bit more charitable on Trump than I would be. Ultimately, the buck stops with him. He talked about releasing this info, and he is the head of the executive departments. That includes the FBI and DOJ. Yeah, the FBI did try to frame him for treason under the whole Russiagate hoax, which was exactly that. It was a scheme to undermine the president, but now he has his guys in power. He has Dan Bongino and Kash Patel at the FBI. He has Pam Bondi at the DOJ. He should be able to fulfill the promises he had. So it looks more than duplicitous, and that he is perhaps involved when that does not happen. And he's been awful quiet about this. He's just basically let the FBI and DOJ run with this without commenting on it. And that's, a crime too. I hope that journalists do poke at him over that, although there isn't much sense of real journalism involved because most corporate journalists seem more incensed by mean tweets that he makes than things like a sex trafficking ring that swept to the highest levels of government.
there was no systematic blackmail. That actually might be the most preposterous line in the document.
But it doesn't make any sense. So they've said that there were thousands of young people, in some cases minors, underage children, sexually victimized. Are they saying that Epstein single-handedly had sex with all? Because actually, for whatever it's worth, I don't think anyone I've never seen anyone make the claim that Epstein had sex with anybody.
Yes, that's right. Well, a lot of these allegations revolve around like group activities,
right,
and they around like masseuse and being, I mean, look, the way that Dershowitz and others would claim it is I kept my underwear on and it was all very above the board massage information. There's that famous photo of Bill Clinton in the airport terminal with one of these young victims who herself says she was a victim of the Epstein entire machine. So you're exactly right. It's like for these thousands of women, were they victimized entirely by Ghislaine Maxwell and by Jeffrey Epstein? Because, by the way, that's not even what the Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein court documents and other things that we already knew that were in the public information. That's not what they say. That's not what the testimony of the victims of these people say. And so, again, even this client list thing, and I do think people can go down the rabbit hole too much and think that there is, as you know, there's no ledger as
right,
in
exactly.
Had sex with so-and-so and we, because of that, supported Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. This is true. The whole idea of the client list, though there's probably lots of information about clients that did exist and has been subsequently either destroyed or swept under the rug by the FBI and the DOJ, it's kind of become, as Glenn Greenwald has called it, something of a right-wing fable. And I don't say that disparagingly. I do think that it's a genuine drive of many people to get to the bottom of this with info, but there's unlikely to be like a singular document, a 9x11 piece of paper that lists each and every Epstein client. No, but we do know what does exist from information that the FBI sees that we're known to be documented, like the CDs in a safe that was found in his Florida house that contained, printed media with the names of prominent people on it. He had CCTV footage feeding in through his house and, supposedly on this media. And now we're supposed to just pretend like this doesn't exist. And again, Pam Bondi said they had thousands of hours of children being molested that they were looking through. Well, apparently she's gone back on that too. These people cannot get their story straight. And it's so absurd and it's just disgusting. These people are laughing at us. It's like in a few months, we're going to get an update to this press release that says the FBI has concluded that no such person as Jeffrey Epstein ever existed before. And they're going to sell this. They're going to sell this line all the way to the bitter end.
That's not how it works.
So the term client list itself is misleading, you're saying?
It's misleading because really what we want is a full list of the victims, of the people who flew on the flight logs. But the most important is the money. And I think a lot of people actually miss that in the Epstein story. Jeffrey Epstein came to power largely because he worked at Bear Stearns and effectively was like a high finance money laundering expert. That's effectively what we can learn from his background. That's how he came involved with Leon Black. Leon Black was one of the most powerful men businessman in New York. This is the head of the Apollo Group. He paid him $170 million through various shell corporations for tax advice. And when he was caught doing that, he was said, actually, it wasn't even useful because all the tax advice was actually in the public domain. So what? I mean, Leslie Wexner in the 1991, I believe, signed full power of attorney over to Jeffrey Epstein. He was one of the richest men in America. I think.
Yeah, this is right too. Wexner gave him several hundred millions of dollars too, but Epstein was known to be a billionaire. It's not even clear how he got all of his money, but the circumstances through which he acquired it were dubious at best when it comes to, fitting within the scheme of reality the rest of us live in, because there's no way that he, of his expertise level, could have just gotten into Bear Stearns, became, a junior partner to a trader, and then became a partner to the actual organization like nothing. This guy was a math teacher that got excused and essentially fired for fraternizing with young women that he, taught, presumably. So there's all sorts of absurd things in this that just don't make sense unless Epstein was part of an intelligence ring. This has all the hallmarks of someone contacted by intelligence services to work on behalf of them to extract information and blackmail. And there's nothing more powerful than having this kind of material, this kind of dirt on the most prominent people in the world. You can bend people to your will like no one else can. Like not even, the fiercest ruler on earth can.
Was the richest man in Ohio at that time. Jeffrey Epstein becomes the head of the Wexner Foundation, funnels some $2.5 million to Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister. I'm putting these things out there because I want people to know that the money is an integral part of the operation, and to the extent that the sex trafficking and all of that is linked, they are fused together because they were used primarily by the intelligence community. Both Epstein was a conduit of high-stakes money laundering for things like, not Iran-Contra specifically, but let's say like funneling arms from Israel to Iran. This was also how he met eventually Robert Maxwell and became ensnared with his daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell. The money laundering is actually more key to his intelligence
arms
rules.
From Israel to Iran?
Well, this was a key part of the Maxwell story. Robert Maxwell is a very sketchy character, Ghislaine Maxwell's father. People focus on the tabloid. That's actually not all what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is the fact that he's this Czechoslovakian Orthodox Jew who escapes from the Nazis. He eventually becomes a highly decorated soldier. Actually, I think he won the second highest medal in the UK for his operations during World War II. From that point forward, becomes very, very enmeshed with the Zionist community inside of the UK and propping up the newly formed state of Israel. From that point forward, he basically serves as a high stakes, almost an entity in and of itself. That's the way that Daryl Cooper has described him, is like a sovereign wealth fund almost, which with together brokers all kinds of cutout deals, between Israel and Iran. And actually, Epstein himself, when he was just 28 years old, flew on a private jet, I believe, to the Pentagon with somebody who we know is directly linked to these, previous intelligence operations and funneling money and weapons into many of these conflicts. So,
yeah, and Epstein was... his involvement with Maxwell was thorough, and it's known that Maxwell was a Mossad agent. One of the best books that I have to recommend at this point about this whole saga, the Epstein story, is One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb. It's a fantastic book that delves deeper into all these things than anyone else has ever done, and Saagar is impressive with his knowledge on this too. It's clear that he is, really deep into the story as well.
This stretches back decades, and that's a very, very important part of the story. So please just do not tell me that there's no part of a systematic blackmail campaign. It's so preposterous, and it actually just makes me want to tear my hair out. And I guess the only good news is that, just like with the Kennedy assassination, we do all know the truth. The Kennedy assassination broke this country. I really believe that. I know you do as well. But it broke something even more fundamental and opened up what they called the credibility gap under the Johnson administration, where prior to the 1960s, Americans trusted their government. It was actually a beautiful thing. I mean, it was bad in some ways as well. We were taken advantage of by the Dulles brothers and a lot of other horrible things they were doing in the 1950s. But it was beautiful in the sense of social and of civic trust.
Yes.
And something was broken with that, with the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah, totally agree with him here. It's not like critiques of government didn't exist. They certainly did, especially during, the Great Depression and during World War I. I mean, they had to pass the Espionage Act to jail dissidents against the war, and they called them essentially traitors. They did this with Eugene Debs, the most prominent socialist in America at the time. They put him in jail over this, and thankfully he was pardoned by Harding. Harding had the good sense about that. But there were critiques against government before this, obviously, during the Civil War, obviously, during the Alien Sedition Acts, obviously, Nullification Crisis, obviously, during Bleeding Kansas, obviously. There were junctures in which there was a lot of criticism toward government. But during the 20th century, this was a watershed moment, the Kennedy assassination, where Americans really started to distrust their government in a serious way. And, Saagar's laying it out perfectly here as far as I'm concerned.
And then it was extended, of course, into the war in Vietnam. And we've never been the same since. And all the Trump administration elected on the backs of a lot of these people who want more transparency in government, saw a lot of this corruption, to just turn around and do the same thing. It's just too much. It's too much for me, and I think it's too much for a lot of other people.
I remember thinking when Epstein killed himself, I never met Epstein, but I mean, he, knew everybody. I mean, I will say, in his, in the defense of people who got caught up in this because they went to dinner at Epstein's, like that George Stephanopoulos, for example, who I disagree with and everything, but like, I know George, and I don't think George is having sex with kids at Epstein's. Yeah. Like Epstein was, just part of like the social fabric, right? And Trump knew him for that reason also. But when he killed himself, I remember thinking people were like, he didn't kill himself. I was like, yeah, he probably killed himself. He's in jail, whatever. His brother Mark called me a couple days after he killed himself. And so began this like 3-year-long conversation with Mark Epstein and looking into it in a way I never thought I would. He didn't kill himself. Yeah. He was murdered in his cell.
Yeah.
And I think that's really meaningful. It's the most secure federal lockup in the United States. How can that happen?
Well,
absolutely true. And there's questions even by Epstein's lawyers on this. I think that there was an autopsy done on his body that determined that a bone had broken in his neck that usually does not break during hanging. It usually is much more consistent with being broken during strangulation. And there are other oddities too, like in the cell. And there are some pictures that exist from within the cell, after this happened, is there's 2 orange nooses and it's not real clear which one was used. And there's just so many different absurdities about this. At one point they said, the cameras malfunctioned, but just for that time. All other times were essentially captured. And then Kash Patel goes on Rogan and said, no, the footage exists and you're going to see it. And you're going to be able to make your own decisions. Well, he didn't mean the footage everyone wanted to see, the actual suicide, to prove this, to put it out there and show us for real, case closed, we can be assured that happened. No, it's grainy footage from the hall outside with a break in the timestamp showing that like something like 1 minute and 20 seconds pass, and it doesn't show the entire time frame anyways. And I've also seen people, and I'm not sure about this aspect, saying that wasn't actually where Epstein's cell even was in the complex either. So there's so many absurdities to this, like you can't make it up. No one could make this tale up.
Can't happen without state actors involved. Okay?
That's right. Look at the story that we were told at that time. Part of the information dump here by the administration is some hours of footage. We were told that footage didn't exist. We were told that this was some guards who were, off. I think they
fell
were on
asleep.
duty. They fell asleep. This was, and none of it exists. And actually, it was all part of a screw up, and the camera angles wouldn't even be able to show anything. But that's why they're relatively confident. So where did this camera footage even come from?
Well, the camera footage doesn't even. First of all, it ends before they take his body out.
Right.
Why can't we see that? Yep. And the angle on it is absurd. Yeah. But the real question, just not to be pedantic, but the real question is, who are the other inmates on that cell block? So no one came in or out of the cell block. I think that's fair. It was the most secure cell block in that federal lockup in Manhattan. But who are the other inmates? And I went to Department of Prisons, which is part of DOJ, and asked, like, what are their names? Oh, we can't for privacy reasons. Really? These are people who can't vote or own a firearm?
Yes.
For the rest of their lives, but somehow they've got like a HIPAA law or something around who's a federal inmate? Fuck you, actually.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I didn't expect that from Tucker, but that's a great train of reasoning and a great train of inquiry. Just another layer to all this absurdity. There were inmates there with Epstein, some of which were transported out of there immediately after this happened too. So if you think this is kind of, something that happened within the cells, within the jail, another inmate may have been responsible, they sure have tried to sweep that under the rug too and not provided Americans with answers. What do you know?
It made me so mad because, of course, if Epstein was murdered, and it's very clear that he was murdered by another inmate.
That's right.
And we know that a bunch of them were transferred out of that unit right after he died.
Right.
Who were they? Where are they now?
Right.
Like, why can't we get an answer to that question? So the whole thing that this tape shows that he didn't kill himself is like a joke. But worse than that, it's a joke that we all get. Like, they're not fooling anybody. So I feel like we're at a dangerous point now.
Yeah, I agree, because the lie is more the lie at this point is not even part of trying to convince any of this is true.
Yes.
The lie is a signal to everybody else involved in the scheme that to the ultimate ends, the United States government will go to protect all of you.
Yes.
Absolutely. That is so true. It's a signal to those that were involved that they're protected. They don't have to worry about this because the American people are not buying this. Even some of Trump's most zealous and diligent supporters have come out really against this, really angry. And I hope they continue their anger because we need to keep talking about this, to keep this in the news. Don't let it go away like JFK eventually did to some extent. Obviously, still people do talk about that. And, you know, as he mentioned, note it as a juncture in history by which after that Americans don't trust their government. But there is a double-edged sword here to some extent, because I do believe that just this level of cover-up, this level of absurdity, this narrative we're all supposed to swallow is actually going to be taken by some Americans as kind of an awakening moment, like as a red-pilling moment that, hey, these people are vile actors in government. This is the most evil thing you can possibly cover up, and they're doing it. So I think there might be, you know, some silver linings to come from it. It's so hard to say that given how tragic and how disgusting this whole saga is. But if there are silver linings, I do think many Americans, especially on the more dissident leaning side, will awaken to the notion that their government isn't just misguided, it is evil.
And that's the question. For
Man,
what
is that smart?
purpose?
Can you say that again? Okay,
Yes.
so it's a signal.
The lie is not for you and me. The lie is for those implicated to say, no matter what, we will protect you. And then we have to start asking the question, why? As in, what is the purpose of this entire thing? Why does it matter that it happens right before the Israeli prime minister comes to Washington for the third time? As you said, what is the linkage here between those two? And the linkage is the fact that even a surface level view of Jeffrey Epstein, of the case, of the entire public record, reveals Alex Acosta, who said he belonged to intelligence. He said that, the person who was responsible for the sweetheart 13-month deal.
Yeah, he also said that I was told that he's above my pay grade. This is Alex Acosta. This isn't just Joe Blow, some conspiracy theorist they call all of us for bringing this up. This is the prosecutor that let him off on what he calls, a sweetheart deal, which it was. He basically got to run the sheriff's department, allow people to come in and out. He had work release. He could go out and walk the streets to get fresh air. He basically ran the place under this deal. It wasn't really even a punishment. He could go from resident to resident. And he had multiple residences, as we all know. So, he's exactly right here.
Alex Acosta, who is the U.S. attorney, said, and I believe he testified this in sworn testimony, said, I was told he belonged to intelligence. That was a key part of why the charges were dropped against him. And, he got some sweetheart Palm Beach County Jail situation where he was allowed to leave on the weekends. And why, even though I know you'll forgive George, but I actually won't. I don't have dinner with pedophiles. I'm not sure about you. I'm generally aware of the people who I am around. And if I can get invited to someone's house, I do cursory Google searches. That's generally what, I think that's normal.
Smart.
I don't want to be in the presence of people who I think are like genuinely evil. That's what I think. So,
yeah, that's totally right. I'm so glad that these two are making this discussion and having these conclusions drawn based upon the absurdities that are being thrown our way, like all the other propaganda that they sell us, the war propaganda that we have to go to war with Iran over nuclear weapons that don't exist and they can't strike America anyway. Because why? Because Netanyahu wants us to. It's just so absurd. The COVID regime, that we had to abide by masking and cloth masks were our saviors, and the 6-foot rule, which Fauci even admitted came out of nowhere later. We had to abide by that. We had to shut down society, let grandmothers die when their loved ones can't even visit them, die alone. all this propaganda we're expected to just swallow wholesale. I really hope that this is the moment of a great awakening in the United States where dissidents wake up to what's actually being done to them and what's being covered up. And probably the biggest cover up in U.S. history, it seems, is the Epstein sex ring. This was a sex trafficking ring that didn't just involve people no one knows about. It involved the most powerful and rich people in the world, and world leaders and royalty in the UK, and former US presidents knew Epstein very closely, including both Clinton and Trump. Now, I don't know what can be done about this other than to keep making noise. Like I said before, making noise is the best thing we can do. Do not let this go the way of, just dying like the COVID regime. There's clearly not going to be any prosecutions for the villains that threw us essentially behind bars within our own homes with, lockdown orders and people having to watch the news and listen to the radio to understand if their governor would give the decree that they could leave their house that day. We're under this prison of the state and its, censorship regime, its war regime, its cover-up regime, and its surveillance regime. And we need to break free from that. And part of it is disrupting the propaganda, because once these things become precedent, the government just builds upon them and reenacts them and revives them. Saagar talked about how, they're just going to try to make this the way that the Kennedy assassination went and hope that sticks. But we can't let that stick. Saagar's done exhaustive research on this. I really appreciate that. But also, again, Whitney Webb's great book, One Nation Under Blackmail, on the Epstein case is absolutely phenomenal. But I do want to hear what you guys say down below in the comments. Let me know what you think about this whole thing. Are they laughing at us? Do they think we're idiotic? What good can come of this? Do you think that this will awaken a lot of people to see the vast evil that is present in their government? Let me know in the comments below. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. You'll support my channel by doing that, and by doing it, you'll get access to all of my videos on YouTube before they go live for the general public. So I really appreciate it if you go those links to support me. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.